Hello, Cardinals, and welcome to our first installment of Cormac McCarthy's The Road. When he woke in the woods in the dark and the cold of the night, he'd reach out to touch the child sleeping beside him. Nights dark beyond darkness, and the days more gray, each one than what had gone before, like the onset of some cold glaucoma dimming away the world. His hand rose and fell softly with each precious breath. He pushed away the plastic tarpaulin and raised himself in the stinking robes and blankets and looked toward the east for any light, but there was none. In the dream from which he'd wakened, he had wandered in a cave where the child led him by the hand, the light playing over the wet flowstone walls, like pilgrims in a fable swallowed up and lost among the inward parts of some granitic beast. Deep stone flues where the water dripped and sang, tolling in the silence the minutes of the earth and the hours and the days of it and the years without cease, until they stood in a great stone room where lay a black and ancient lake, and on the far shore a creature that raised its dripping mouth from the rimstone pool and stared into the light with eyes dead white and sightless as the eggs of spiders. It swung its head low over the water as if to take the scent of what it could not see. Crouching there pale and naked and translucent, its alabaster bones cast up in shadow on the rocks behind it, its bowels, its beating heart, the brain that pulsed in the dull glass bell. It swung its head from side to side and then gave out a low moan and turned and lurched away and loped soundlessly into the dark. With the first gray light, he rose and left the boy sleeping and walked out to the road and squatted and studied the country to the south, barren, silent, godless. He thought the month was October, but he wasn't sure. He hadn't kept a calendar for years. They were moving south. There'd be no surviving another winter here. When it was light enough to use the binoculars, he glassed the valley below, everything paling away into the murk, the soft ash blowing in loose swirls over the blacktop. He studied what he could see, the segments of road down there among the dead trees, looking for anything of color, any movement, any trace of standing smoke. He lowered the glasses and pulled down the cotton mask from his face and wiped his nose on the back of his wrist and then glassed the country again. Then he just sat there holding the binoculars and watching the ashen daylight congeal over the land. He knew only that the child was his warrant. He said, "If he is not the word of God, God never spoke." When he got back, the boy was still asleep. He pulled the blue plastic tarp off of him and folded it and carried it to the grocery cart and packed it and came back with their plates and some cornmeal cakes and a plastic bag and a plastic bottle of syrup. He spread the small tarp they used for a table on the ground and laid everything out, and he took the pistol from his belt and laid it on the cloth, and then he just sat watching the boy sleep. He'd pulled away his mask in the night, and it was buried somewhere in the blankets. He watched the boy and he looked out through the trees toward the road. This was not a safe place. They could be seen from the road now that it was day. The boy turned in the blankets and then he opened his eyes. "Hi, Papa," he said. "I'm right here." "I know." An hour later, they were on the road. He pushed the cart and both he and the boy carried knapsacks. In the knapsacks were essential things in case they had to abandon the cart and make a run for it. Clamped to the handle of the cart was a chrome motorcycle mirror that he used to watch the road behind him. He shifted the pack higher on his shoulders and looked out over the wasted country. The road was empty. Below in the little valley, the still gray serpentine of a river, motionless and precise. Along the shore, the burden of dead trees. "Are you okay?" he said. The boy nodded. And then they set out along the blacktop in the gunmetal light shuffling through the ash, each the other's world entire. They crossed the river by an old concrete bridge, and a few miles on they came upon a roadside gas station. They stood in the road and studied it. "I think we should check it out," the man said. "Take a look." The weeds they forded fell to them like about sorry. The weeds they forded fell to dust about them. They crossed the broken asphalt apron and found the tank for the pumps. The cap was gone, and the man dropped to his elbows to smell the pipe, but the odor of gas was only a rumor, faint and stale. He stood and looked over the building, the pump standing with the hoses oddly still in place, the windows intact. The door to the service bay was open and he went in. A standing metal toolbox against one wall. He went through the drawers, but there was nothing there that he could use. Good half-inch drive sockets, a ratchet. He stood looking around the garage. A metal barrel full of trash. He went into the office, dust and ash everywhere. The boy stood in the door, a metal desk, a cash register, some old automotive manuals swollen and sodden. The linoleum was stained and curling from the leaking roof. He crossed to the desk and stood there. Then he picked up the phone and dialed the number of his father's house and that long ago. The boy watched him. "What are you doing?" he said. A quarter mile down the road he stopped and looked back. "We're not thinking," he said. "We have to go back." He pushed the cart off the road and tilted it over where it could not be seen, and they left their packs and went back to the station. In the service bay, he dragged out a steel trash drum and tipped it over and pawed out all the quart plastic oil bottles. Then they sat on the floor, decanting of them their dregs one by one, leaving the bottles to stand upside down, draining into a pan, until at the end they had almost a half quart of motor oil. He screwed down the plastic cap and wiped the bottle off with a rag and hefted it in his hand. Oil for their little slut lamp to light the long gray dusks, the long gray dawns. "You can read me a story," the boy said. "Can't you, Papa?" "Yes," he said, "I can." On the far side of the river valley, the road passed through a stark black burn, charred and limbless trunks of trees stretching away on every side, ash moving over the road, and sagging hands of line wire strung from the blackened light poles winding thinly in the wind. A burned house in a clearing, and beyond that a reach of meadowlands stark and gray, and raw red mud bank where a roadworks lay abandoned. Further along were billboards advertising motels, everything as it once had been, save faded and weathered. At the top of the hill they stood in the cold and the wind, getting their breath. He looked at the boy. "I'm all right," the boy said. The man put his hand on his shoulder and nodded toward the open country below them. He got the binoculars out of the cart and stood in the road and glassed the plain down where the shape of the city stood in the grayness like a charcoal drawing sketched across the waste. Nothing to see, no smoke. "Can I see?" the boy said. "Yes, of course you can." The boy leaned on the cart and adjusted the wheel. "What do you see?" the man said. "Nothing." He lowered his glasses. "It's raining." "Yes," the man said. "I know." They left the cart in a gully covered with the tarp and made their way up the slope through the dark poles of the standing trees to where he'd seen a running ledge of rock, and they sat under the rock overhang and watched the gray sheets of rain blow across the valley. It was very cold. They sat huddled together, wrapped each in a blanket over their coats, and after a while the rain stopped and there was just the dripping in the woods. When it had cleared, they went down to the cart and pulled away the tarp and got their blankets and the things they would need for the night. They went back up the hill and made their camp in the dry dirt under the rocks, and the man sat with his arms around the boy, trying to warm him. Wrapped in the blankets, watching the nameless dark come to enshroud them, the gray shape of the city vanished in the night's onset like an apparition, and he lit the little lamp and set it back out of the wind. Then they walked out to the road, and he took the boy's hand, and they went to the top of the hill where the road crested, where they could see out over the darkening country to the south. Standing there in the wind, wrapped in the blankets, watching for any sign of a fire or a lamp, there was nothing. The lamp in the rocks on the side of the hill was more than a mote of light, and after a while they walked back, everything too wet to make a fire. They ate their poor meal, cold, and lay down in their bedding with the lamp between them. He'd brought the boy's book, but the boy was too tired for reading. "Can we leave the lamp on until I'm asleep?" he said. "Yes, of course we can." He was a long time going to sleep. After a while he turned and looked at the man, his face in the small light streaked with black from the rain, like some old world thespian. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes, of course." "Are we going to die?" "Sometime, not now." "Are we still going south?" "Yes." "So we'll be warm?" "Yes." "Okay." "Okay, what?" "Nothing, just okay." "Go to sleep." "Okay." "I'm going to blow out the lamp. Is that okay?" "Yes, that's okay." And then later in the darkness, Can I ask you something? Yes, of course you can. What would you do if I died? If you died, I'd want to die too. So you could be with me? Yes, so I could be with you. Okay. He lay listening to the water drip in the woods, bedrock this, the cold and the silence, the ashes of the late world carried on the bleak and temporal winds to and fro in the void, carried forth and scattered and carried forth again, everything uncoupling from its shoring, unsupported in the ashen air, sustained by breath trembling and brief. If only my heart were stone. He woke before the dawn and watched the gray day break. Slow and half opaque, he rose while the boy slept and pulled on his shoes, and wrapped in his blanket, he walked out through the trees. He descended into a grike in the stone, and there he crouched coughing, and he coughed for a long time. And then he just knelt in the ashes. He raised his face to paling day. Are you there? He whispered. Will I see you at last? Have you a neck by which to throttle you? Have you a heart? Damn you eternally, have you a soul? Oh God, he whispered. Oh God. They passed through the city at noon of the day following. He kept the pistol to hand on the folded tarp in the top of the cart. He kept the boy close to his side. The city was mostly burned, no sign of life, cars in the street caked with ash, everything covered with ash and dust, fossil tracks in the dried sludge, a corpse in the doorway dried to leather, grimacing at the day. He pulled the boy closer. Just remember that the things you put into your head are there forever, he said. You might want to think about that. You forget some things, don't you? Yes. You forget what you want to remember, and you remember what you want to forget. There was a lake a mile from his uncle's farm where he and his uncle used to go in the fall for firewood. He sat in the back of a rowboat, trailing his hand in the cold wake while his uncle bent to the oars. The old man's feet in their black kid shoes braced against the uprights, his straw hat, his cob pipe in his teeth, and a thin drool swinging from his pipe bowl. He turned to take a side on the far shore, cradling the oar handles, taking the pipe from his mouth to wipe his chin with the back of his hand. The shore was lined with birch trees that stood bone pale against the dark of the evergreens beyond. The edge of the lake, a riprap of twisted stumps, gray and weathered, the windfall trees of a hurricane years past. The trees themselves had been long sawed for firewood and carried away. His uncle turned the boat and shipped the oars, and they drifted over a sandy shallows until the transom grated in the sand. A dead perch lolling belly up in the clear water. Yellow leaves. They left their shoes on the warm painted boards and dragged the boat up onto the beach and set out the anchor at the end of its rope. A lard can poured with concrete with an eye bolt in the center. They walked along the shore while his uncle studied the tree stumps, puffing at his pipe, a manila rope coiled over his shoulder. He picked one out and they turned it over, using the roots for leverage until they got it half floating in the water. Trousers rolled to the knee, but they still got wet. They tied the rope to a cleat at the rear of the boat and rowed back across the lake, jerking the stump slowly behind them. But then it was by then it was already evening. Just the slow periodic rack and shuffle of the oar locks, the lake, dark glass, and window lights coming on along the shore. A radio somewhere. Neither of them had spoken a word. This was the perfect day of his childhood. This, the day to shape the days upon. They bore on south in the days and weeks to follow, solitary and dogged. A raw hill country, aluminum houses. At times, they could see stretches of the interstate highway below them through the bare stands of second growth timber. Cold and growing colder. Just beyond the high gap in the mountains, they stood and looked out over the great gulf to the south, where the country, as far as they could see, was burned away. The blackened shapes of rock standing out of the shoals of ash and billows of ash rising up and blowing down country through the waste. The track of the dull sun moving unseen beyond the murk. They were days fording the cauterized terrain. The boy had found some crayons and painted his face mask with fangs, and he trudged on uncomplaining. One of the front wheels of the cart had gone wonky. What to do about it? Nothing. Where all was burnt to ash before them, no fires were to be had, and the nights were long and dark and cold beyond anything they'd yet encountered. Cold to crack the stones, to take your life. He held the boy, shivering against him, and counted each frail breath in the blackness. He woke to the sound of distant thunder and sat up, the faint light all about quivering and sourceless, refracted in the rain of drifting soot. He pulled the tarp about them and he lay awake a long time listening. If they got wet, there'd be no fires to dry by. If they got wet, they would probably die. The blackness he woke to on those nights was sightless and impenetrable, a blackness to hurt your ears with listening. Often he had to get up, no sound but the wind in the bare and blackened trees. He rose and stood tottering in that cold, autistic dark with his arms out held for balance while the vestibular calculations in his skull cranked out their reckonings. An old chronicle to seek out the upright. No fall, but preceded by a declination. He took great marching steps into the nothingness, counting them He took great marching steps into the nothingness, counting them against his return. Eyes closed, arms oaring, upright to what? Something nameless in the night, lode or matrix, to which he and the stars were common satellites, like the great pendulum in its rotunda, scribing through the long day movements of the universe, of which you may say it knows nothing, and yet know it must. It took 2 days to cross the ashen scabland. The road beyond ran along the crest of a ridge where the barren woodland fell away on every side. It's snowing, the boy said. He looked at the sky, a single gray flake sifting down. He caught it in its hand and watched it expire there like the last host of Christendom. They pushed on together with the tarp pulled over them, the wet gray flakes twisting and falling out of nothing, gray slush by the roadside, black water running from under the sodden drifts of ash. No more vale fires on the distant ridges. He thought that the blood cults must have all consumed one another. No one traveled this road, no road agents, no marauders. After a while, they came to a roadside garage, and they stood within the open door and looked out at the gray sleet gusting out of the high country. They collected some old boxes and built a fire in the floor, and he found some tools and emptied out the cart and sat working on the wheel. He pulled the bolt and bored out the collet with a hand drill and re-sleeved it with a section of pipe he'd cut to length with a hacksaw. Then he bolted it all back together and stood the cart upright and wheeled it around the floor. It ran fairly true. The boy sat watching everything. In the morning they went on, desolate country, a boar hide nailed to a barn door, ratty, wisp of a tail. Inside the barn, 3 bodies hanging from the rafters, dried and dusty among the wan spots of light. There could be something here, the boy said. There could be some corn or something. Let's go, the man said. Mostly, he worried about their shoes. That and food, always food. In an old batboard smokehouse, they found a ham gambreled up in a high corner. It looked like something fetched from a tomb, so dried and drawn. He cut to it with his knife, deep red and salty meat inside, rich and good. They fried it that night over their fire, thick slices of it, and put the slices to simmer with a tin of beans. Later he woke in the dark, and he thought that he'd heard bull drums beating somewhere in the low, dark hills. And then the wind shifted, and there was just silence. In dreams, his pale bride came to him out of a green and leafy canopy, her nipples pipe-clayed and her rib bones painted white. She wore a dress of gauze, and her dark hair was carried up in combs of ivory, combs of shell. Her smile, her downturned eyes. In the morning, it was snowing again, beads of small gray ice strung along the light wires overhead. He mistrusted all of that. He said the right dreams for a man in peril were dreams of peril, and all else was the call of languor and death. He slept little, and he slept poorly. He dreamt of walking in a flowering wood where birds flew before them. He and the child in the sky was aching blue, but he was learning how to wake himself from just such siren worlds. Lying there in the dark with the uncanny taste of a peach from some phantom orchard fading in his mouth, he thought if he lived long enough, the world at last would all be lost. Like the dying world, the newly blind inhabitant, all of it slowly fading from memory. From daydreams on the road, there was no waking. He plodded on. He could remember everything of her save her sense. Seated in a theater with her beside him, leaning forward, listening to the music. gold scroll work and sconces and the tall columnar folds of the drapes at either side of the stage. She held his hand in her lap, and he could feel the tops of her stockings through the thin stuff of her summer dress. Freeze this frame. Now call down your dark and your cold and be damned. He fashioned sweeps from two old brooms he'd found, and he wired them to the cart to clear limbs from the road in front of the wheels. And he put the boy in the basket, and he stood on the rear rail like a dog musher, and they set off down the hills, guiding the cart on the curves with their bodies in the manner of bobsledders. It was the first time that he'd seen the boy smile in a long time. At the crest of the hill was a curve and a pull out in the road, an old trail that led off through the woods. They walked out and sat on a bench and looked out over the valley where the land rolled away into the gritty fog. A lake down there, cold and gray and heavy in the scavenged bowl of the countryside. What is that, Papa? It's a dam. What's it for? It made the lake. Before they built the dam, that was just a river down there. The dam used the water that ran through it to turn big fans called turbines that would generate electricity. To make lights? Yes, to make lights. Can we go down there and see it? I think it's too far. Will the dam be there for a long time? I think so. It's made out of concrete. It'll probably be there for hundreds of years, thousands even. Do you think there could be fish in the lake? No, there's nothing in the lake. And that long ago, somewhere very near this place, he'd watch a falcon fall down on the long blue wall of the mountain and break with the keel of its breastbone the midmost from a flight of cranes and take it to the river below, all gangly and wrecked and trailing its loose and blousy plumage in the still autumn air. The grainy air, the taste of it never left her mouth. They stood in the rain like farm animals, then went on, holding the tarp over them in the dull drizzle. Their feet were wet and cold, and their shoes were being ruined. On the hillside, old crops dead and flattened, the barren ridge-lined trees raw and black in the rain. And the dreams, so rich in color. How else would death call you? Waking in the cold dawn, it all turned to ash instantly, like certain ancient frescoes entombed for centuries, suddenly exposed to the day. The weather lifted and the cold, and they came at last into a broad lowland river, the pieced farmland still visible, everything dead to the root along the barren bottomlands. They trucked on along the blacktop, tall clapboard houses, machine-rolled metal roofs, a log barn in a field with an advertisement in faded 10-foot letters across the roof slope, Sea Rock City. The roadside hedges were gone to rows of black and twisted brambles, no sign of life. He left the boy standing in the road holding the pistol while he climbed an old set of limestone steps and walked down the porch of the farmhouse, shading his eyes and peering in the windows. He let himself in through the kitchen. Trash on the floor, old newsprint, china in a break front, cups hanging from their hooks. He went down the hallway and stood in the door to the parlor. There was an antique pump organ in the corner, a television set, cheap stuff furniture together with an old handmade cherried wood chifforobe. He climbed the stairs and walked through the bedrooms, everything covered with ash. A child's room with a stuffed dog on the windowsill looking out at the garden. He went through the closets, he stripped back the beds, and came away with two good woolen blankets and went down the stairs. In the pantry, there were 3 jars of home canned tomatoes. He blew the dust from the lids and studied them. Someone before him had not trusted them, and in the end, neither did he. And he walked out with the blankets over his shoulder, and they set off along the road again. On the outskirts of the city, they came to a supermarket, a few old cars in the trash-strewn parking lot. They left the cart in the lot and walked the littered aisles. In the produce section, in the bottom of the bins, they found a few ancient runner beans and what looked to have once been apricots, long dried to wrinkled effigies of themselves. The boy followed behind. They pushed out through the rear door. In the alleyway behind the store, a few shopping carts, all badly rusted. They went back through the store again, looking for another cart, but there were none. By the door, there were 2 soft drink machines that had been tilted over into the floor and opened with a pry bar, coins everywhere in the ash. He sat and ran his hand around the works of the gritted machines, and in the second one, it closed over a cold metal cylinder. He withdrew his hand slowly and sat looking at a Coca-Cola. What is it, Papa? It's a treat for you. What is it? Here, sit down. He slipped the boy's knapsack straps loose and set the pack on the floor behind him, and he put his thumbnail under the aluminum clip at the top of the can and opened it. He leaned his nose to the slight fizz coming from the can and then handed it to the boy. Go ahead, he said. The boy took the can. It's bubbly, he said. Go ahead. He looked at his father and then he tilted the can and he drank. He sat there thinking about it. It's really good, he said. Yes, it is. You have some, Papa. I want you to drink it. You have some. He took the can and he sipped it and he handed it back. You drink it, he said. Let's just sit here. It's because I won't ever get to drink another one, isn't it? Ever's a long time. Okay, said the boy. By the dusk of the following, they were at the city. The long concrete sweeps of the interstate exchanges like the ruins of a vast funhouse against the distant murk. He carried the revolver in his belt at the front and wore his parka unzipped. The mummies dead everywhere, the flesh cloven along the bones, the ligaments dried to tug and taunt at wires. Shriveled and drawn like latter-day bog folk, their faces of boiled sheeting, the yellow palings of their teeth. They were discalced to a man like pilgrims of some common order, for all their shoes were long since stolen. They went on. He kept constant watch behind him in the mirror. The only thing that moved in the streets was the blowing ash. They crossed the high concrete bridge over the gray water, tall stacks downriver, dim in the soot. The day following, some few miles south of the city at a bend in the road and half lost in the dead brambles, they came upon an old frame house with chimney and gables and a stone wall. The man stopped and then he pushed the cart up the driveway. What is this place, Papa? It's the house where I grew up. The boy stood looking at it. The peeling wooden clapboards were largely gone from the lower walls for firewood, leaving the studs and the insulation exposed. The rotted screen from the back porch lay on the concrete terrace. Are we going in? Why not? I'm scared. Don't you want to see where I used to live? No. It'll be okay. There could be somebody here. I don't think so. But suppose there is. He stood looking up at the gable to his old room. He looked at the boy. Do you want to wait here? No, you always say that. I'm sorry. I know, but you do. They slipped out of their backpacks and left them on the terrace and kicked their way through the trash on the porch and pushed into the kitchen. The boy held onto his hand, all much as he remembered it. The room's empty. In the small room off the dining room, there was a bare iron cot and a metal folding table. The same cast iron coal grate in the small fireplace. The pine paneling was gone from the walls, leaving just the furring strips. He stood there. He felt with his thumb in the painted wood of the mantel the pinholes from tacks that had held stockings 40 years ago. This is where we used to have Christmas when I was a boy. He turned and looked out of the waste at the yard, a tangle of dead lilac, the shape of a hedge. On cold winter nights when the electricity was out in a storm, we'd sit at the fire here, me and my sisters, doing our homework. The boy watched him, watched shapes claiming him he could not see. We should go, Papa, he said. Yes, the man said, but he didn't. They walked through the dining room, where the fire brick in the hearth was as yellow as the day it was laid because his mother could not bear to see it blackened. The floor buckled from the rainwater. In the living room, the bones of a small dismembered and placed in a In the living room, the bones of a small animal, dismembered and placed in a pile, possibly a cat, a glass tumbler by the door. The boy gripped his hand. They went up the stairs and turned and went down the hallway, small cones of damp plaster standing in the floor, the wooden lathes of the ceiling exposed. He stood in the doorway to his room, a small space under the eaves. This is where I used to sleep. My cot was against this wall. In the nights and their thousands to dream the dreams of child imaginings, worlds rich and fearful such as might offer themselves, but never the one to be. He pushed open the closet door, half expecting to find his childhood things. Raw, cold daylight fell through from the roof, gray as his heart. We should go, Papa. Can we go? Yes, we can go. I'm scared. I know, I'm sorry. I'm really scared. It's all right. We shouldn't have come. 3 nights later, in the foothills of the eastern mountains, he woke in the darkness to hear something coming. He lay with his hands on either side of him. The ground was trembling. It was coming toward them. Papa, the boy said. Papa? Shh, it's okay. What is it, Papa? It neared, growing louder, everything trembling, and then it passed beneath them like an underground train and drew away into the night and was gone. The boy clung to him, crying, his head buried against his chest. Shh, it's all right. I'm so scared. I know, it's all right. It's gone. What was it, Papa? It was an earthquake. It's gone now. We're all right. In those first years, the roads were peopled with refugees shrouded up in their clothing, wearing masks and goggles, sitting in their rags by the side of the road like ruined aviators, their barrows heaped with shoddy, towing wagons or their carts, their eyes bright in their skulls, creedless shells of men tottering down the causeways like migrants in a fever land, the frailty of everything revealed at last. Old and troubling issues resolved into nothingness and night. The last instance of a thing takes the class with it. Turns out the light and it's gone. Look around you. Ever is a long time. But the boy knew what he knew, that ever is no time at all. He sat by a gray window in the gray light in an abandoned house in the late afternoon and read old newspapers while the boy slept. The curious news, the quaint concerns. At 8, the primrose closes. He watched the boy sleeping. Can you do it when the time comes? Can you? They squatted in the road and ate cold rice and cold beans that they'd cooked days ago, already beginning to ferment. No place to make a fire that would not be seen. They slept huddled together in their rank quilts in the dark and the cold. He held the boy close to him, so thin. My heart, he said, my heart. But he knew that if he were a good father, but he knew that if he were a good father, still it might well be, as she had said, that the boy was all that stood between him and death. Late in the year, he hardly knew the month. He thought they had enough food to get through the mountains, but there was no way to tell. The pass at the watershed was 5,000 feet, and it was going to be very cold. He said that everything depended on reaching the coast, yet waking in the night, he knew that all of this was empty and no substance to it. There was a good chance they'd die in the mountains, and that would be that. They passed through the ruins of a resort town and took the road south. Burnt forests for miles along the slopes and snow sooner than he would have thought. No tracks in the road, nothing living anywhere. The fire blackened boulders like the shapes of bears on the starkly wooded slopes. He stood on a stone bridge where the water slurried into a pool and turned slowly in a gray foam. Where once he'd watched trout swaying in the current, tracking their perfect shadows on the stones beneath. They went on, the boy trudging in his track, leaning into the cart, winding slowly upward through the switchbacks. There were still fires burning high in the mountains, and at night they could see the light from them deep orange in the sootfall. It was getting colder, but they had campfires all night, and that left them burning behind them when they set out again in the morning. He'd wrapped their feet in sacking, tied with cord, and so far the snow was only a few inches deep, but he knew that if it got much deeper, they would have to leave the cart. Already it was hard going, and he stopped to rest. He stopped often to rest, slogging to the edge of the road with his back to the child where he stood, bent with his hands on his knees, coughing. He raised up and stood with weeping eyes. On the gray snow was a fine mist of blood. They camped against a boulder, and he made a shelter of poles with the tarp. He got a fire going, and they set about dragging up a great brush pile of wood to see them through the night. They'd piled a mat of dead hemlock boughs over the snow, and they sat wrapped in their blankets watching the fire and drinking the last of the cocoa scavenged weeks before. It was snowing again, soft flakes drifting down out of the blackness. He dozed in the wonderful warmth. The boy's shadow crossed over him, carrying an armload of wood. He watched him stoke the flames, God's own fire drake. The sparks rushed upward and died in the starless dark. Not all dying words are true, and this blessing is no less real for being shorn of its ground. He woke toward the morning with the fire down to coals and walked out to the road. Everything was alight, as if the lost sun were returning at last. The snow orange and quivering, a forest fire was making its way down to the tinderbox ridges above them, flaring and shimmering against the um, overcast like the northern light. Cold as it was, he stood there a long time. The color of it moved something in him long forgotten. Make a list, recite a litany, remember. It was colder. Nothing moved in that high world. A rich smell of wood smoke hung over the road. He pushed the cart on through the snow. A few miles each day. He'd no notion how far the summit might be. They ate sparely, and they were hungry all the time. He stood looking out over a country, a river far below. How far had they come? In his dreams, she was sick, and he cared for her. The dream bore the look of sacrifice, but he thought differently. He did not take care of her, and she died alone somewhere in the dark, and there's no other dream nor other waking world, and there is no other tale to tell. On this road there are no God-spoke men. They are gone, and I am left, and they've taken with them the world. Query: how does the never to be differ from the never was? Dark of the invisible moon, the night's now only slightly less black. By day, the banished sun circles the earth like a grieving mother with a lamp. People sitting on the sidewalk in the dawn, half immolate and smoking in their clothes, like failed sectarian suicides. Others would come to help them. Within a year, there were fires on the ridge and deranged chanting, the screams of the murdered. By day, the dead impaled on spikes along the road. What had they done? He thought that in this history of the world there might even be that there was more punishment than crime, but he took small comfort from it. The air grew thin, and he thought the summit could not be far. Perhaps tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went. It didn't snow again, but the snow in the road was 6 inches deep, and pushing the cart up those grades was exhausting work. He thought they'd have to leave it. How much could they carry? He stood and looked out over the barren slopes. The ash fell on the snow until it was all but black. At every curve, it looked as though the path just lay ahead. And then one evening, he stopped and looked all about, and he recognized it. He unsnapped the throat of his parka and lowered the hood and stood listening. The wind and the dead black stands of hemlock, the empty parking lot at the overlook. The boy stood beside him, where he'd stood once with his own father in a winter long ago. "What is it, Papa?" the boy said. "It's the Gap. This is it." In the morning they pressed on. It was very cold. Toward the afternoon it began to snow again, and they made camp early and crouched under the lean-to of the tarp and watched the snow fall into the fire. By morning there was several inches of new snow on the ground, but the snow had stopped, and it was so quiet that they could all but hear their hearts. He piled wood on the coals and fanned the fire to life and trudged out through the drifts to dig out the cart. He sorted through the cans and went back, and they sat by the fire and ate the last of their crackers and a tin of sausage. In a pocket of his knapsack, he found a last half packet of cocoa, and he fixed it for the boy and then poured his own cup with hot water and sat blowing at the rim. "You promised not to do that," the boy said. "What?" "You know what, Papa." He poured the hot water back into the pan and took the boy's cup and poured some of the cocoa into his own and then handed it back. "I have to watch you all the time," the boy said. "I know. If you break little promises, you'll break big ones. That's what you said." "I know, but I won't." They slogged all day down the south-facing slope of the watershed. In the deeper drifts, the cart wouldn't push at all, and he had to drag it behind him with one hand while he broke trail. Anywhere but in the mountains, they might have found something to use for a sled, an old metal sign, or a sheet of roofing tin. The wrappings on their feet had soaked through, and they were cold and wet all day. He leaned on the cart to get his breath while the boy waited. There was a sharp crack from somewhere on the mountainside, and then another. "It's just a tree falling," he said. "It's okay." The boy was looking at the dead roadside trees. "It's okay," the man said. "All the trees in the world are going to fall, sooner or later, but not on us." "How do you know?" "I just know." Still, they came to trees across the road where they were forced to unload the cart and carry everything over the trunks and then repack it all on the far side. The boy found toys he'd forgotten that he'd had. He kept out a yellow truck, and they went on with it, sitting on top of the tarp. They camped in a bench of land on the far side of a frozen roadside creek. The wind had blown the ash from the ice, and the ice was black, and the creek looked like a path of basalt winding through the woods. They collected firewood from the north side of the slope, where it was not so wet, pushing over the whole trees and dragging them into the camp. They got the fire going and spread their tarp and hung their wet clothes on poles to steam and stink. And they sat wrapped in quilts, naked, while the man held the boy's feet against his stomach to warm them. He woke whimpering in the night, and the old man held him. Shh, he said. Shh, it's okay. I had a bad dream. I know. Should I tell you what it was? If you want to. I had this penguin that you wound up, and it would waddle and flap its flippers. And we were in that house we used to live in, and it came around the corner, but nobody had wound it up, and it was really scary. Okay. It was a lot scarier in the dream. I know, dreams can be really scary. Why did I have that scary dream? I don't know, but it's okay now. I'm going to put some wood on the fire. You go to sleep. The boy didn't answer, and then he said, the winder wasn't turning. It took 4 more days to come out of the snow, and even then there were patches of snow in certain bends of the road, and the road was black and wet from the up-country runoff, even beyond that. They came out along the rim of a deep gorge, and far down the darkness a river. They stood listening. High rock bluffs on the far side of the canyon, with thin black trees clinging to the escarpment. The sound of the river faded, and then it returned, a cold wind blowing up from the country below. They were all day reaching the river. They left the cart in a parking area and walked out through the woods, a low thunder coming from the river. It was a waterfall dropping off of a high shelf of rock and falling 80 feet through a gray shroud of mist into a pool below. They could smell the water and they could feel the cold coming off of it, a bench of wet river gravel. He stood and he watched the boy. Wow, the boy said. He couldn't take his eyes off of it.